Time to record an episode. All right. Suppose I should start recording, but I hit play and then I started thinking, and then I'm like, what? Let's wing it. Alrighty then. Welcome back to Finding Your Identity. I'm Derek McKinney, and this is episode 32. And we shall get started, recording an episode. I think that would be good. And this episode is going to be about capturing the moment, as I'm going to call it. But, it's going to be about recording stuff that happens in your life and recording those, moments. And it's something that I had on my mind recently because I just happened to be thinking about how things changed dramatically in the past, 10, 15 years or so with how we do that, because cell phones became better and better at taking pictures, better picture quality, how you store the photos, so that's like one method of recording a moment, capturing a moment. And it really kind of changed things because I feel like there's a period of time where you really had to kind of be more thoughtful about bringing a camera along, when you were going to do some kind of activity. Otherwise, you didn't really have an easy way to record it because, unless you happen to bring your easel and canvas and a set of oil paints or something, and you were capturing it that way. But that's kind of old school and slow. But needless to say, things were different, 10 to 20 years ago. More like 20 years ago, I guess, because now it's 2020. So I'm just thinking back to how I used to capture moments with friends when I was, younger, when I was a teenager. And it was kind of interesting. And it's funny because, a friend of mine had just sent me a picture of this tiny micro tape, or like what you used to use in a tape recorder when you wanted to just record a conversation or something like that. Those are still used. They're digital now, but it used to be that it was an actual tape cassette, and this was a tiny tape cassette, but there was, this period of time when, not to go on too much of a tangent, but, we were actually kind of locked ourselves in his downstairs. He had a raised ranch, and we said, listen, we're going to record what's the basis for a screenplay. It's going to be the greatest screenplay ever. And we stayed up all night, and I think we started at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And we talked into this tape recorder back and forth with all the ideas and explaining the entire story and everything, every single detail about this story. And, come morning time, where we basically had stayed up all night, and it was, probably 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was like, that was epic. That was, this is going to be the best thing. It's going to change our lives, because we're just teenagers at this point. I think, I forget how old at the time, but it was like, that's, this is it. This is the big break. And so that kind of got, he recently just found the tape cassette, and he's like, I need to find a way to, I need to buy the tape recorder to actually put it into play. And it got me thinking about, how we record moments in our past, or, at the time, how you're recording something to save for the future, and how that technology changes. And you kind of almost have to be a little bit thoughtful of that, because the fact that the technology does change somewhat rapidly means you may actually capture something in a format on a device, that's not going to be around, 20 years, so you won't actually have a way to play it back. So it kind of just got me thinking about that, and it became an interesting idea to talk about, to have as a concept to talk about in this episode. So that's what I wanted to talk about, capturing the moment, beyond just like how you capture photos, but just how you capture moments. And so that's what I'm going to talk about in this episode. And, it's probably something you maybe don't pay too much attention to, and it's worth thinking about, and it's worth at least planning a little bit out how you might capture things in a way that they can essentially live forever. So that's what this episode will be about, and we'll talk more after the break. Now, capture in the moment is really, it could be in many ways. A lot of times it's just you're capturing it in your head and it's a memory, right? Obviously, the simplest way to go about capturing a moment. But, if you really think about it, there's all, it's hard to do that and then really feel like you've captured it forever, because it's easy to forget things. So obviously, as a human race who likes to capture things and remember things, and it's not just for our own personal benefit, it's obviously for the benefit of future generations. It's like history is the best teacher, because you're basically trying to learn from the mistakes of the past, or just learn in general from the past to help improve future outcomes. And it's obviously like one of the best ways to help improve things, by looking at how things happened in the past, how things kind of evolved. And so it was kind of out of necessity. You think back to how cave people, Neanderthals, whatever you want to call them. I won't judge you for how you say it, even if you say it wrong. But it's, the cave paintings or the cave writings that were the first way that things were captured, essentially. And if you think about how things were captured in that sense to capture their histories or their stories, and I think of the movie The Croods, which is just like one of my favorite cartoon movies. And I think it was really well done, and it's a good story, and it's also pretty hilarious. But how, they kind of point to the cave paintings as them looking at the previous cave paintings as warnings as to, how things went wrong for them and what not to do. And essentially the whole start of the movie is like they hide in a cave when there's danger, and they don't come out very often, because that's what the cave paintings told them to do, that being in a cave was safe. And, obviously that, like, if you've ever seen the movie, you kind of realize it needed to kind of come out to actually survive, because, the ancestors had given them, I guess, well, you could say, a path to survive up until that point, but then they needed to survive longer. And it was the cave paintings, that essentially taught them that. And obviously that's just a cartoon. It's probably not completely like out of the idea that that's what cave paintings were used to communicate, not necessarily the idea that they were communicating with people from, 2020. They probably didn't even think that far ahead, and I'm sure they couldn't even imagine what kind of technology we'd have now. But, the idea was more, short-term focused in terms of thinking like we need to record this, maybe it's just for ourselves for now, but also, future generations, like in the next, 10, 20, 30 years, could use those paintings as a guide, and it helped communicate the languages, so that people could have common languages, and information, pictures, whatever it is, and it's not purely for administrative reasons, but there's obviously, like, it's sharing personal pictures, if you want to say, like pictures about the family, their family, or whatever, like however they interpreted the drawing, however someone else would interpret the drawing, like it could, we look at it as like, oh, it's historical and it tells us a lot about the species, or not the species, the the type of people, I guess what you call it, at the time. But it really was not at the time that they were doing it. Their intentions wasn't so much to like help us figure them out. It was, the immediate need for communicating, or recording, I should say, recording moments and information, and for their own pleasure, for whatever. But I think it kind of points to the fact that there's just really been this inherent need in humans to do this, to record stuff, to capture moments. And in this day and age, it's really easy to do. I mean, I just think of on my phone now all the different ways that I might communicate with somebody, because it's not just one. You got text message, you got video calling, then you've got things like Twitter, where you're now exposed, or able to expose information, or your thoughts to the entire world for all intents and purposes, and Facebook, it's not so much the entire world, but it potentially is. I mean, because Twitter, it's like, obviously people need to be following you, but stuff can kind of get picked up in public threads. Facebook, it's supposed to be really just between your friends that you've essentially chosen, but the way that it works, it's friends of a friends of a friends, whatever. So you post it on Facebook just the same way as on Twitter. It could essentially spread, go viral or whatever, and get shared out, and then get picked up and reshared, whatever. Someone grabs a photo, they can download it to themselves, they can re-upload it, or download it to their own devices and then re-upload it, and it's no longer in your control, which I think is an important factor to consider when you're trying to capture moments. I don't really like to share pictures of my children online, like especially on Facebook, because I don't like, to me it feels a little wrong, because the kids don't have any consent in it, especially when they get older. And it's like, you've got people who share, pictures of kids in the bathtub or something like that. And, that's kind of alarming in a sense, So I think you got to be consider that could be problematic. It's definitely important to have a consideration of the methods that you use to share information. Not just a consideration just because of, who might be in the picture, but also, when I say consideration, this is going to go back to the fact that I said, how are you capturing it? If you think about how maybe 40 years ago, you were capturing photos with film, like, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess it's a roll of film. I'm trying to think, if somebody wasn't familiar with it, how would you kind of explain it? Because you used to take photographs a lot differently. Like when the photos were originally made, they were essentially, it's like you take a picture and it flashes light, and the light kind of flashes back at the camera, and it's almost like burned onto this special kind of film, and it's what do they call it? Like I guess it's like the negative light. They used to call them negatives, actually. And the way that it's kind of burnt onto that film is the best way I could think to describe it. And it's burnt on there, and what it does is, it captures that image, and then it has to be developed, as they call it. So you'd actually have to take the negatives, which was the film, the roll of film, and you have to bring it somewhere and have it developed, because it had to be run through a certain process. And it started off that it was really kind of a crude method, I guess you could say, where you look at like old photos, like Western pictures, I don't know if the cameras back then could actually, like, some of them were almost kind of like what they call Polaroid, like a Polaroid, where it would be an instant picture. I mean, not necessarily instant. like some of those cameras, you actually had to hold the exposure or keep the lens, like the light that's coming into the camera, that had to be exposed and open for a long period of time. Like I don't know, I'm gonna guess maybe like 2 to 5 minutes or something, in order for the picture to actually be captured, in order for enough light to create that effect, that exposing effect, I guess you could say. And so, as things evolved, the process, I think, for a long time, and I think back to like the 80s or 90s, where it was like dark rooms and a special kind of water or something or liquid that you had to actually, you take the negative, which was really small, and you put it in the water, and it was like the way the light bended in the water or something like that. Like I'm just completely going off of what I'm guessing is how the process was, because I didn't actually plan to talk about the process, so I didn't really do any kind of research into it. But I do know from what I've seen, because I've seen this done in movies or documentaries, and it's essentially, the way you lay the negative into the water, it's basically causing the picture to be able to be made bigger from the negative, because the negative is something that's like really tiny, like fits in the palm of your hand. I don't know, it's like this tiny, picture this tiny little square thing, that essentially the way that the developing process is it was able to kind of take that picture and then essentially zap it. I'm going to use these real technical terms, zap, but basically magically make it appear on the actual film paper, that ends up becoming the photograph that you'd end up getting back. And essentially that process was kind of, I think, pretty tedious, to some degree. And I remember I'd have film developed sometimes where the picture would have some weird artifacts in it and weird blemishes, and it was all part of that process. And it was like you had to be very perfect with it. And things kind of got better, because I had a really old 8mm type camera, I guess. Well, not 8mm. I think that was a camcorder, but I had a point and shoot type of film camera that I got at one point, and I would take pictures, and I had black and white film, and I was like, I'm an artist. I'm a photography artist, because I could take a black and white picture and I'd just take random angle pictures and be like, look at the magic in the art, but it looked cool, and actually it would look cool, and sometimes they turn out like to be really cool shots. And when I went to visit Rome, and I took a picture of the Colosseum, like I took a picture I brought that camera, and I had a black and white roll in there, and I had color rolls, and I took some really good shots. I think I could trace the blown up picture of one of the pictures I took that I had framed, because I had a couple of them framed, but I don't even know, like, and that's one of the problems, is like I couldn't ever really replicate that, because I don't have the negatives. Like I don't have the original film rolls, because I did have them at one point. I have no clue where they went. And that's part of the problem, because the original, that negative is what can be used to turn it into larger prints, larger sizes of the picture. So that's again back to that whole consideration of how you're capturing it. Obviously you can only use what's available to you, and it's not like I was taking these pictures and I'm thinking, like I'll have a digital camera soon enough, like that wasn't kind of a thought. But I wish I was a little bit more conscious of the fact that I should have held on to those negatives a little bit better. I should have made more of an effort to hold on to those negatives, so that I could, at whatever point, maybe potentially try to redevelop them and see, how they might look today with more cleaner techniques for developing. But kind of goes back to that point I was trying to make about just being conscious of how you're capturing it, and knowing, okay, so for instance, that the micro cassette tape, having the tape is worthless if you don't have any way to play it. And that's kind of the irony of it. because I think you kind of thought, oh well, I'm capturing it on a tape, and as long as I've got this tape, I've recorded it and I can go back to it. But if you don't, if you've lost the method of playing it, like, it's worthless. Like 8-track or four track players, or 8 tracks, I forget what I think they're called 8 tracks. Those are like a funky sized cassette tape, and so that funky sized cassette tape is like unplayable without a 8-track player. I keep saying 4-track. I think that's actually like a DJ thing, 4-track recorder. An 8-track, I think, might be spelled differently, but that basically is a good point to consider. Is like, how the heck would I play this? Like, obviously, I'm sure if you searched on eBay, you could find an 8-track player. They've been managed to be preserved, but like, I think of when I had these original zip drive. I had this iOmega zip drive thing, and it was kind of a clunky thing. It is like the size of what an iPad is today, and I had that thing, and it was like, it hooked up with a special cable into the computer. Might have been like one like plugs in as USB. Well, I can't even remember what kind of cable it takes, but anyways, so that's how I stored files externally, like, because usually, you'd have very limited space on your computers back then, and you'd get an external drive if you wanted to store stuff on that. And so, I used to store some of the stuff I wrote, sometimes I think maybe like music files or whatever, like any kind of media that I had, I would store, and I'd store it on those little disk drives, and those disk drives didn't really like store a ton. So I might have had, I don't know, 10 or 20 of these disk drives. And then the drive stopped working, and I had no way. It was like all that effort to preserve all that information was completely useless, because I had no way to recover it. Now, at the time, it was like, okay, that broke, and I could rebuy. I went out and I bought another one, or maybe I bought a component to fix it. I forget, but it was kind of like, that shines a spotlight on the fact that you're at the mercy of that technology, kind of, and it was, at the time, that was one of those things, like, okay, you got to deal with that. Like, obviously your computer goes down and you've got a bunch of important information stored on it, and then you're kind of screwed if you need it, and that's kind of one of those age old computer adages, like, redundant backups are very key, and that businesses have redundant backups, multiple redundant backups of customer data or financial data or whatever, just because you never know. Like, you got to have some kind of data recovery plan, if you're a business, but people don't generally have recovery plans, like, you're not thinking like, oh, I need a secondary backup drive, because it's like bad enough that things are expensive. So you just bought one drive and you're like, oh, I got a good drive, and I'm actually making a backup of the stuff from the computer onto this drive. But then you get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm running out of space, and you start deleting the data on your computer, and you're like, well, it's okay, I've got a backup. But then if the backup method fails, then what? So like, that's just something to kind of keep in mind, when we're using new technologies to capture moments. And other than your memories, although you could get hit in the head and have amnesia, and then your personal recovery, your backup method is unable to recover memories, and stuff can just happen, like, on extreme levels. But I think with proper preparation, from a personal level, like, you can avoid some of these problems, such as, you can have the disk. So you have the disk. So as long as you have a way to kind of go recover that technology, the problem is now, okay, so a micro recorder might not necessarily, some of those tape formats, those tapes might actually be different sizes, right? So there may not actually be that size player around anymore, right? So then you got a problem. So you not only have to preserve the storage device, like the cassette tape, but you also have to preserve the player, So like it's something to just be conscious of, and in terms of capturing moments. And then you got like this still happens because one of the problems that I had recently was I had several what they call NAS drives. They're network storage drives, network access storage, something like that. Um, I call them NAS drives. I had a couple of them, and they were internet connected, and so I had a network of them. I had 4 of them at one point. And it was kind of a good method to back up, because you could set it up automatic, and you can also access it remotely. You didn't have to be on the actual computer itself, which is a level of convenience, and it's great. But then you have to kind of take into consideration extra security protocols and blah 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 blah. Make sure it's safe. I don't want to get into the technical nitty gritty, but I did that, and these things worked great. And I actually had a drive that I strictly used as a backup drive, a redundant backup drive. So I actually had, bunch of photos, documents, tons of stuff. I mean, just years and years of stuff. In addition to some, other like videos and stuff like that. And it was pretty full. Like, this drive was full. And I bought this other drive, and I just created a backup drive from it. So it backed up the other drive. So like I said, it was a redundant backup. It was the exact same info on both. And that was meant to be, okay, well, if one of them fails, I have the other one. And, those things, they lasted a few years, but then one of them did fail. And I was like, well, it's a good thing I've got this redundant backup. And, but I was just like, well, I've got this backup, and I'm like, I need to get another redundant backup for it. And I had it like, I was just thinking, I got to get this fixed, try to get the other drive fixed. I could try to recover the stuff, and then just stuff kind of, life got in the way kind of thing. And the second drive ended up failing. And I was like, uh-oh. And now it's like, I have the drive, and I know the drive isn't corrupted. It's actually, there's kind of this bridge to get to the data. And the drive is actually, by default, it's encrypted. So I just can't access it anymore. I can't get it to essentially load up so that I can access it. And so there's a whole bunch of photos that are just on it that, to some degree, most of the photos I think were backed up in some other form through phone storage, which I'll get to later. Cloud storage, I mean. And with the cloud storage through your phone, Google Photos, iCloud, whatever. But anyway, but I still, I don't know exactly. There was thousands of photos, so I don't know exactly which things there might be gaps from, and so like that's always kind of a concern, that I mean, not only is it completely dependent on the technology, but you can't just like set it and forget it kind of things. It's gotta have some care and feeding. You gotta check it. You gotta make sure you've got some kind of backup system for like what happens. What are you gonna do if that method fails, right? So I think that's what's kind of important to consider, and the reason why I felt like a need to do this episode, because I think it's important for people to consider that whatever you're doing to capture moments, like mostly people are doing that with photographs, home videos, through their phones. You almost need to back up in as many places as possible and in the safest, securest way, just to be safe. It could be the original, stay on your phone. You have cloud backups. You got these. You got it on your computer, because you can connect to your computer in many different ways and move the photos there, copy them there. Plus, you could have these backup drives, there's many ways to do it. In terms of the actual tech behind it, I'm going to get to that shortly in like the next segment of this, but I kind of wanted to step a little bit beyond just photographs too, because I think if you consider capturing moments to be, more than just pictures, journaling, for example, where you're essentially keeping a journal or a diary, it always felt like when I was young, it was kind of like, I don't want to keep a diary. That's for girls, but I keep a journal. They're the same thing. you're writing your thoughts and feelings in a notebook. Maybe it's not a heart-shaped notebook or doesn't have hearts drawn all over it, or a locket, not a lock, a little lock and key on it, but it's still effectively a diary. And there's nothing wrong with it. But I think journals are kind of cool. I wish I could have stuck with it. I used to, I wrote like poetry and short stories, and that was kind of how I captured moments, but they weren't, an everyday thing. It was just whatever I happened to be writing about, thinking about at the time. I still think it's a good way. I go back and I look at some of those poems I wrote, and I think something was wrong with me. Definitely was going through some stuff, but it's, it was a good way to capture those moments. So I thought that was kind of cool. A cool method to kind of preserve a moment in time, if you will. And I think it's one way to do it. There's other people who do scrapbooking, which does involve photographing, but it also is kind of like mixing journaling and taking pictures, where you basically paste your photographs into a scrapbook and then write, stuff around it, or type it and print it and then paste it in there. Whatever method, you're still capturing the moment, if you will. And scrapbooking is kind of a cool thing. Now you can do like digital scrapbooking, and if that's how you approach it, then great. So I think it's important to do it regardless of how you do it. That's the main thing, because you want to preserve stuff. You may want to preserve, like, before you're married, or you have kids or whatever, you may want to capture things, thoughts, stuff you did that before that, so that you can share it with your future family, so however you kind of capture the moment, it's kind of a critical decision. It may just be like, oh, well, it's just this moment in time, it's not a big deal, but it could have an everlasting impact on the future if you think about it. If you think about how you might be writing advice to yourself for the future. It's like you come up with a really good idea in the middle of the night, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I wish I had somewhere to write it down. And you do have a notebook or something, and then you write down that brilliant idea, and then you wake up the next morning and you're like, oh my gosh, this actually was a good idea. This wasn't just, some kind of midnight random thought that made sense at 2 a.m., but it has no sense about it at, this 8 o'clock in the morning when I'm thinking clearly. But you never know. Sometimes you do. It's like you have an invention idea or something like that could be brilliant. You never know. So it's worth it. It's worth it to kind of capture that. So capture the moment. And I'm going to take a break and then come back and talk about some tools that you can leverage. Okay, so what can you do? Lots of things. I'm going to go through with a list of things that I personally do, use. Like, obviously taking pictures. But, taking pictures is great as long as, you don't lose your phone, or, you don't accidentally delete them. And so what I mean is, having some kind of backup system is important, which I mentioned before, but I like to use Google Photos You can use that on an Android device or you can use it on an iPhone. There are some things to be conscious of while doing it. I mean, for one thing, you can have it set to automatically back up, at all time. Like anytime that essentially you take a picture, it'll automatically back up. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's public, but it means it is being stored on some server that's out of your control. And you always have to imagine if Google is keeping redundant backups, like how deleted is something when you delete it. It's supposed to be deleted, but you never know. You just never know. Like, you take a picture on your phone and it's not backed up anywhere else and you delete it. You can feel pretty confident that it's gone, although there's, forensic specialists who could probably recover that photo. That's a whole different story about how data drives work, essentially. But, I don't know. If you're not taking appropriate pictures and you're worried, maybe you need to not take appropriate or inappropriate pictures. Or you need to use a different kind of device to do it. I don't know. But bottom line is, just be conscious of the fact that you take a picture and you use some kind of cloud backup. It is going to be on a server and it's going to be out there, and it isn't necessarily shared with the rest of the world, but it does live on some kind of device that's out of your control. And if there's like a data breach or whatever, that stuff can get exposed. So, the next step is okay, you've taken pictures and it's like, all right, you know what? I just took pictures of a recital or a sport event or whatever, and I want to share this. So, Google Photos lets you create albums and then share them with other people. And the nice thing is then they can share pictures. So if you're both at the same event and, you've taken pictures and they've taken pictures, you can combine them all together in that same shared album, which is kind of cool. Now, I know like iCloud has something similar, but, I'm not an Apple person. And I don't really like iPhone. So that's not my jam. And I'm not going to even try to explain it because I don't care too much about it. But you can go out and you can figure out how you can do essentially the same thing. There's tons of ways to do it. You can do it with Dropbox too. You can have a Dropbox account and have it automatically back up photos, and you can share the folder that you store those photos in, and essentially, and I think you can open the photo or open up the folder so that other people can contribute to it and do the exact same thing. So it's really just pick your technology of choice, or method. So Google Photos, though, like I said, it works on iPhone, works on Android, and it's great, but it also, excuse me, it also has, some privacy concerns. And so, I felt like at the very least, I should help guide some people, who care to want to know, help guide how to kind of be safe, So there are privacy settings that I was looking up, just to kind of get clarification. But basically, let's put it this way: Google, a lot of times by default, unless you're going through a setup process and you're reading every part of the screen, they kind of have stuff turned on by default, like share data, share error reporting, share whatever, because that's their business, is data, and having people have that stuff turned on is critical to their business. So you got to sometimes go out of your way. I might have mentioned this in previous episodes about the practicing safe internet, but you got to go out of your way to turn these things off. Like in your browser in general, in Chrome, in Firefox, in Safari. If you go into settings and you go to privacy settings and you really dig into it, you could see that it'll say, automatically send crash reports, or or there's even the option for don't allow tracking. Like it'll tell websites, hey, don't track me. Not that it has that much of an impact, but some sites do respect it, like the big reputable ones do. And so you got to go out of your way to turn that setting on to say, don't let websites track me. Same thing with the photo privacy settings. You got to be conscious of the fact that sometimes by default, your photos are tagged with a location, with geolocation. Like longitude and latitude coordinates are actually embedded as metadata on your photos when you take them. You actually have to go out of your way to turn that off. I don't know if that one's on by default, but sometimes you accidentally turn it on because you'll get prompted and you're like, I just want to take a picture, and you hit buttons, and the next thing you know, you basically are tagging every single photo with your location of where you took it. Now Google looks at that data, and that is part of the whole mapping your life, essentially digitizing everything about these users, all their users' lives, like where photos might be taken might be of value to advertisers, obviously, right? So you got to be conscious of it. I don't turn that setting on. I don't like that setting. I think it really, to me, has no value at all to have geolocation coordinates pinned to my photographs. I don't know if it's like, oh, well, maybe in the future you'd want to be able to search back to find out where you took that photo. Maybe, but no, like for me, no, I'd rather not. I'd rather just be like, oh, well, I guess I'll never know where I took that picture because I don't care that much to know exactly where I took it. And if I can't remember where I took it, that's just, to me, it's a minor problem. It's a bigger problem to think that that data is being used for some reason. And even though, it's technically not public, it's still, anonymously being stored. And so I don't like that feature. Turn it off. I recommend people turn that off. You go into settings and you go under photo settings and you turn off. You can turn off location history. First of all, it's one thing. You can turn off having your photos tagged with geolocation. So those are like the first things. Then error reporting. A lot of times I turn off because you can set, like, sometimes you get prompted if your apps crash on your phone. This is specific to apps. It'll say, do you want to send a crash report to the app creator, and that can be useful to them. If your app crashes a lot, then, by all means, send a report once in a while, but be conscious of the fact that it needs to capture a whole bunch of data in the report in order to try to help troubleshoot what was wrong. And so it could be like, you kept typing something, so it means whatever you typed is going to get sent along with that report. So you just gotta be aware of that, So I always turn off crash reporting, and I don't like to share stuff because I feel like I'm definitely a proponent of I should get something out of this. It's a one-sided relationship. Yeah, I'm getting to use the app for free, so I guess there's that. But I feel like you're getting a lot more out of this than what I'm getting for it in return. So it's always slippery slope to me, like, striking that balance. So needless to say, you got to go in and you got to do a checkup. Now, Google is recently, and mainly because of GDPR, like the European Union putting out the data privacy, data ownership laws. Now, Google will prompt you to do privacy checkups, and you can go search privacy checkup Google, like in Google, do that search. You can go and actually make sure that that you understand how your privacy settings are set up, and that's like the geolocation tracking and blah blah blah. So, not to blah 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 my way through that. It's important to know what all is inside of that blah blah blah, but there's a lot of details to it, so I don't want to drown in trying to cover all that. So, mainly you got to be aware. You got to go into settings. You got to go under privacy settings. You got to see what's set. I, will sometimes just go in and I'll just do a clean slate. I'll go search Google and do my activity. And you might see, if you look in my activity under photos, it happens to be like locations are tagged on these photos. You can delete all that data. You legally have the right to do that now. So, and make sure when you're deleting data, also make sure that you're choosing to delete all of it and not just for the past month or something like that, or the past day. You got to check for the length of the history too. I'm definitely an advocate for privacy, users having control over privacy. So I definitely go down that tangent path often. But when it comes to photos, they're probably going to be personal for the most part. Stuff that you don't want to share with the whole world. You just want to share with a handful of people. That's the nice thing about Google Photos, because you can easily just pick who you want to share the album with. They can like photos and comment on photos, and so you got a method of sharing. Now, what I think is important to kind of recognize with that is it's gotten to this world of what they call cloud data, cloud storage. So doing it that way, it is preserving it. Now, granted, if the apocalypse hits, the apocalypse hits. That's what I'm trying to say. If that hits, or the internet is essentially wiped out, so are your photos. So that's always something that could happen. Now, most people probably don't believe it's going to happen anytime soon, but just in case, what I think is kind of cool to do sometimes is, and this is something that my wife often does for our family, and I think it's a cool idea, is she'll kind of turn it into stuff, turn it into books, like these album books, turn it into a blanket, turn it into a towel, turn it into, framed photos, things, or whatever, turn them into things, mugs, t-shirts. Take these moments, find, narrow them down to some handful of pictures that you want to actually put out there and essentially publish to something personal, a pillow, coffee mug, placemat, whatever. But I think doing that, you end up getting a kind of a collection of these memories in a cool way that is essentially preserved for all time. I mean, if you do pillows, blankets, stuff, that stuff could wear out, but it's gonna be around for a lot longer. So I think it's often a good idea to consider, well, how do I take this and kind of turn it into something, more permanent. So I think that's something you can kind of look at. I think it'd be a good idea, so you should look into doing something like that. Now, some other things, like if you're into writing, you need something that could, and I'm not getting paid for this. Like, I'm not getting paid to push Google Photos, or any apps that I talk about, Dropbox. I just happen to know the technology, and I've used the technology, and I don't like Dropbox because I don't want to have to pay a ton extra. Although I pay for Google storage, but it's kind of more of a universal package that covers all types of products. So it's not just photos. Google Drive, I have like 200 gigs or whatever, and I forget whatever it is per year for that, like $30 a year. iCloud is similar. I think iCloud has a cost associated with it too. Whatever you choose to use as a tool, you're going to obviously have to weigh the costs, because there's always some cost. Could be hidden, it could be obvious. You pay for iCloud or Dropbox or Google, or you sacrifice your own digital identities because you're giving up data. Whatever it is, you got to evaluate that kind of thing. You just got to make sure you're aware of whatever you're using. There is another tool that I wanted to mention, which is called Evernote, and I like it because it's cloud-based, and it has a free version. The catch with the free version is I think you're only allowed to have 2 devices synced for the free version, and if you want to sync more than that, you got to pay. I don't know how much it is actually, but I generally just use the free version. Sometimes I have to go and disassociate a device so that I don't have to pay. But usually it's like the 2 devices is maybe a phone and a tablet, or a phone and a computer, or something like that. Which I like it because you can kind of store, it's mainly like kind of a notepad type thing, but you can also snap pictures and store pictures in it. And, I often will use it to kind of make lists. I have a Samsung phone, which has a Samsung Notes, which also is something that's kind of synced, although it's a little like, I don't know, I have a little bit more of a problem with it than I do with Evernote, mainly because it seems like it's harder. I don't know. To me, it's a little bit harder to figure out what exactly is the intent because it's free, from Samsung. And like I feel like it's pretty obvious, Evernote. Eversource is my electric company. Evernote is the app that is pretty obviously, trying to get you to pay money, but it provides that free version. And so, I know the intent there. They're always trying to get me to upgrade. They're always warning me I only have 2 devices synced and I can have many more, but I can't really see the value in having more than that. I mean, it might be nice if I could sync 3, like a phone, a tablet, and a computer, but I can live with just what I have available. So I don't, I don't pay. I don't push myself to need it. I kind of stay within the color within the lines with that one and, stay to what's available. But, I think what to me is kind of critical is, a part of this evaluation of all these tools is, what's the potential longevity of it? I feel like they're all kind of questionable. What happens if Evernote just kind of ups and disappears? So occasionally I kind of think, what do I have in it? I kind of do an audit. What's in here that I might need? I feel like, generally speaking, the app isn't going to just disappear if the company goes under. You just lose your sync because maybe they shut down their servers, but, you at least have your local version. And, if you hear that they shut down, or, they generally will warn you. You can figure out an exit strategy for that. So it's often important to kind of consider those things, and I feel like people can kind of overlook it. With the drives that I mentioned earlier, it's just so easy to set up. It's plug and play. You plug the thing in to a USB port, and you've got the drive going. The next step is you hook it up to an Ethernet cable, and it hooks up to your router, and you're online. But you got to go to the next step, which is you need to, log into it, follow the instructions on how to log into it and change the default passwords. Because just because it's on your network and you feel like your network is safe doesn't mean that somebody can't hack into your network and then you're just using the out of the box username and password on one of those drives. And now that drive is easily compromised. So, you gotta think about all these things because it's all capturing data, and part of this is, I called this capturing the moments, but it's where you put in those moments and what are those moments. And generally these moments are captured as data, unless it's a memory, right? Which is kind of data-ish, but it's in your head, it's got to be stored, so it needs devices. So everything that you're doing, we're out of the age of digital cameras where it was really, not digital cameras, film cameras, where it was film and it was kind of captured on that film. And that was the only avenue to get something developed, was through taking the picture, having it put on those negatives, bringing the negatives to, a photo place and a 1-hour photo or whatever, and then having them developed. And that was kind of that easy single path or whatever. Now it's like a digital camera has an SD card or some kind of memory card that you gotta, maybe hook up the camera via USB to a computer, which then you transfer those photos to a folder, and then maybe you upload them to Walgreens or CVS or Walmart, and then, order prints, and then you go pick them up, and, but then now it's digital data, and you have to consider how that data is being transmitted, over the internet and how it's getting stored. And those photos don't live just on your camera anymore. They're stored on Walmart servers or CVS servers. And all this stuff is just, it's exposing it. So it's like you take pictures. Another thing you have to worry about, it's like this thing that it used to be simple when it was just kind of a film camera and there was just that one avenue to getting something developed. Now you got to be conscious of the fact that, how are you turning something into some kind of digital print, or are you doing that, or are you just storing it on a drive? Just stuff to consider, as kind of the wrap up here. But I think generally speaking, it it can be an easy process. You just set this stuff up and set it and forget it. Like once you do this initial setup, you're fine, and then you got a system in place. You got, a dry, Google Photos just automatically backing up your photos, and you've already changed your privacy settings. And now you can go into the Google Photos app and you can choose which private photos you want to make public by sharing an album with people or keep them private. You can go on to Walmart and you can choose which photos you want to upload and figure out your system. Or some people use like Shutterfly or other things to make those pillows or blankets, or have prints made or mugs made or whatever. So I think eventually you kind of figure, if they just sit on a drive, it's like you take all these pictures and that's it. It's like, oh, did I really, I really didn't do it justice. I captured the moment, but I didn't really kind of follow through, you know, creating like books for your kids, baby books or whatever is a way to capture things. And that kind of helps translate that memory, that moment to something tangible, and I think sometimes it's important to kind of step back and consider that hundreds and hundreds of photos just sitting on a drive and you never look at them, it just kind of feels like a waste. But this is just some thoughts on capturing the moment. So I just wanted to put that out there, put my thoughts out there about capturing the moment. This podcast captured this moment, I guess you could consider that another way of capturing things. You could start a podcast. You could, I want to do a separate episode about, journaling and writing, but you could, you could do public journaling or something, online where you can help share. I actually had a website that I created, my second website, but really I consider my first, because it was the website that I built where I experimented with building all types of features and stuff like that, like chat and message boards and stuff. But it was called Story Passers, and the whole premise of it was to, you could start a story and then somebody else could come along and pick it up and continue that story, and then someone else could come along and that story could kind of keep evolving, and then somebody could, choose to wrap it up and close it out, and you'd have this story that was written by 10 people that would be very unique, and it was kind of an idea. The idea behind it was, that it was really kind of meant to get your creative juices flowing, so that's kind of a form of public journaling, although the site is, terrible, really needs to be rebuilt, but I just haven't had time. And, just an example of some way that you could be capturing your thoughts, about stuff, writing stories, doing the journal entries, like I mentioned before, the diary. And some people just like to take photos just of things that are not necessarily family photos, but just, go out in the woods and take pictures of trees, or go find abandoned buildings or whatever, which I think is actually cool. There's actually a subreddit which is called, I think it's called abandoned porn, I think is what it's called, which is great because it's like you get to actually see how people have captured these things that have essentially just kind of disappeared, and the earth is reclaiming them. So just lots of ideas as to how to kind of capture moments, just stuff I'm putting out there. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was Finding Your Identity, and I hope to hear you. I always say hear you. Like I can hear you through the microphone. Like this is two-way, like a walkie-talkie. No, I hope that you enjoyed this and that you come back and listen. That's what I'm trying to say. So this is Finding Our Identity. Until next time, goodbye.